Whenever I talk to people about investing in Fundrise, the number one reason that they give me why they're hesitant about investing with Fundrise is because of the liquidity issues. The second reason is because of the penalties that Fundrise imposes if you try to sell the shares of the e-REITs or the e-funds before the 5-year period. Well, this is all about to change. Coming up. If you're new to the channel, my name is Trey, and I'm a stock, real estate, and crypto investor. I'm a swing trader as well. If you enjoyed this video and found the content helpful, please don't forget to click that like and subscribe button. Now, let's get started. On September 17th, 2021, Fundrise announced that they will be slashing their penalty fees for withdrawing or selling their e-funds and e-REIT shares prior to a 5 years waiting period by over 66%. Now, before we go into an explanation of what is changing, let's look at how Fundrise has been operating up until this point. Age of shares is how long you've been holding the shares for. So for example, if you had the shares from 90 days to 3 years, you would get a 3% penalty if you decide to withdraw them prior to a 5-year waiting period. If you hold on to your shares for 3 to 4 years, it's 2%, and if you hold on from 4 to 5 years, it's 1%. If you hold on to your shares and you only sell them after the 5-year waiting period, there would be no penalty. Another important thing is that prior to the update, you were able to withdraw your initial investment at 0% penalty if you held it for 90 days or earlier. Prior to the announcement, Fundrise practiced something called LIFO, which stands for last in, first out. We will get into exact definition of what it is and what it means for the individual investor later in the video, but essentially they're changing it to something called first in, first out, or FIFO, which is a great news for individual investors. So this is the actual announcement article. So I'm gonna leave a link down below to this article, but check it out. The new policy is effective October 1st, 2021. So we pretty much just got 11 days left with the old policy. So they're changing two things, as I said before. The new policy, the shares held less than 5 years will be subject to a flat 1% penalty, including the shares held less than 90 days. As I mentioned previously, in the current policy, that if you held the shares less than 90 days, there were no penalty at all, 0% penalty for withdrawal. But if you held anywhere from 90 days to 5 years, there will be a penalty between 1 and 3%. So what they're doing is they're getting rid of this whole ladder penalty, and they're saying that no matter what, if you withdraw early, you will get 1% penalty. Another thing they're changing is the order of redemption processing. This is what I meant before. In the current policy, you have last in, first out. In the new policy, you're gonna have first in, first out. Now, what the heck does that mean? Why does it matter which shares are sold first or sold last? Well, it is a big deal. So what happens is that most Fundrise investors, they don't just put a big chunk of money all at one time and buy the shares of these e-funds and the e-REITs. They actually invest on a monthly basis. Let's say they invest $1,000 a month, every month for 5 years, right? So what happens is that that $1,000, you buy a certain number of shares. So the 5-year rule doesn't just apply to how old your account is. It applies for when you bought the shares. Let's do an example where you buy 1 share per month for 5 years. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do it in months. You have month 1, month 2, and so on, and for 5 years it's month 60, and the 5 years and 1 month is month 61. So the shares that you bought in the first month will have no penalty in month 61, but the shares that you bought in month 60 will have penalty in month 61. Correct, right? So in the current policy, when they say if you decide to sell the shares, the current policy is LIFO, last in, first out. That means the shares that you purchased last in month 60 will be automatically the shares that are sold in month 61, and you have no say over that. That means the penalty rule would still apply to you, even though you have older shares that are already 5 years old, correct? So let's say you wanted to cash out a couple of shares and you say, I want to sell 3 shares in month 63. So what you're essentially doing is you're saying, hey, I've been investing for 5 years and I have 3 shares that have been invested for over 5 years. There should be no penalty. I want to cash out those shares that will not give me a penalty. However, in the current policy, that's not possible. They will automatically sell the shares that you bought last in month 60, in month 59, and 58. That's the current policy. In the new policy, again, in the new policy, this is all changing. And the new policy is FIFO, first in, first out. This is what investors want. So the shares that you bought in month 1 and month 2 and month 3 will be penalty free at month 63. So the first shares that you bought will be the first shares that will be sold. So what it does for the investors, actually, first of all, you get no penalty. Second is that it saves you money on taxes, because as you know, if you hold the shares for less than a year, you will get taxed at your regular tax bracket, depending on how much money you make. However, if you hold for at least a year or longer, you will get capital gains, which is usually anywhere from 15 to 20%. So that is really, really good for an individual investor. And a really good way to explain this whole first in, first out, or last in, first out thing is I actually opened up this chart here. I just put it in Google. So as you can see on the left side here, we see input, right? So imagine that number 1 is the shares that you bought in month 1. Number 2 is, let's say, shares you bought in month 30, and number 3 is the shares that you bought in month 59 and 60, right? So the current policy is LIFO, right? So even though you put in the shares in this order, 1, 2, 3, if you decide to sell these shares, they will be sold in a completely reverse order, 3, 2, 1. So that means the shares that you bought in month 59 and 60 will be the first ones sold in month 61. And they're changing it to FIFO, first in, first out. So that means that the order that you buy shares will be the order that when you decide to sell your shares, that's the order that will be sold at. So let's say the shares that you bought in month 1 will be the shares that will be sold in month 61. Therefore, you will not pay as much taxes. You will only pay capital gains on these returns to sell these shares. And obviously, there will be no penalty for selling your shares. Now, I think that's a great development. I think we're going to see a great surge in the amount of people trying to invest in Fundrise, and I'm really glad about that they're making this change. Now let's go over a couple of things that are not changing, right? Because we know they're changing the penalty and they're changing the way the shares will be sold. What is not changing is the 5-year investment term. So unfortunately, there will still be a 1% penalty if you hold for less than 5 years. However, just like you wouldn't buy a house and not live in it for at least 5 years and then sell it, the same thing happens with Fundrise. If you decide to buy eFund or eREIT Fundrise shares, make sure that you're there for the long-term game, at least 5 years, because that is usually how long it takes to build up a certain real estate property and actually make some money off of it. Another thing that's not changing is the redemption processing timeline. So again, there's a 60-day waiting period when you request to sell certain shares. Why is there a 60-day waiting period? Well, guys, the way Fundrise works is that it collects all the money, right? And it doesn't just invest in it, and it doesn't just invest that money right away. What it does is it waits until the end of the quarter, and then it takes that whole big chunk of money they collect and they invest it. Then they do the same thing in the next quarter. They wait, they pile up all the money, they wait, and then the end of the quarter they invest it. The same thing happens when you try to redeem your shares. They can't just right away give you the shares. What they got to do is they got to see how many people want to redeem their shares in that quarter, and by the end of the quarter they're able to either sell certain properties or sell certain projects, or maybe allocate certain rental income into their portfolio that they're going to pay out to their investors that are cashing out. So again, there has to be a waiting period, because again, even though they're making this a more liquid process to satisfy their investors, and they hear what people are wanting and what people don't like about the platform, and they're changing it. Again, it's real estate. There will always be a waiting period. It will never be as liquid as a stock market, where you could buy and sell shares in like 3 seconds. So that's another thing that's not changing, is that the 60-day waiting period. And obviously the last thing that's not changing is that the redemption requests are not guaranteed to be approved. And again, people get scared by this. But the fact is, if there's what they call economic turbulence, like what happened during COVID-19, where there was a downturn in the economy, there was fear, there was uncertainty and despair. However, what Fundrise did was they did not let their investors cash out, right? And what that allowed them to do is that it allowed them to have enough capital to invest into real estate that actually lost a decent amount of value during coronavirus. And now these real estate investors, these Fundrise investors, are enjoying crazy returns. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comments down below. And what do you think? Is this a good change? Will this make Fundrise a more popular platform for investors, or will it all just be the same? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.